If you have a goal or a dream, think of it as though you're climbing a mountain. It's always tempting to try to sprint to the top as fast as you can, but if your mountain's at all noteworthy, you're going to want to embrace the switchbacks. When I left my Wisconsin home nearly 30 years ago and drove out west, get into Montana, get closer to Trout Creek where this guide school was at, I look up on these mountains and I see this zigzag line going up the mountain. I didn't even know what that was. But what I come to find out, they call them switchbacks. Just this last year, I was back in Montana speaking, probably 10 miles from where I went to guide school, and I was climbing up a mountain. And I was following the trail. The switchback trail would go zigzag and just gradually go up. And there was this outcrop that I kind of wanted to get to, and it was so tempting to just charge straight up the hill and get to that outcrop, thinking that once I got there, I was going to have this fantastic view. And it kind of like slapped me in the face how slow I am to learn. And I realized, like, man, that is like one of the greatest keys and secrets to life, is just embrace the switchbacks. The first really big pack trip we did at guide school, it was at the end of this month-long course, and we were going to go on an overnight. So we were going to ride these horses. I believe it was a long trip. It was something like 50 miles. And that first mountain that we climbed, we were zigzagging and following these switchbacks. I'm 19 years old, and I was so impatient because, yeah, we climbed some mountains, we went up some valleys, but it was always really timbered. This was the biggest mountain we were going to get to go up, and at the top was alpine. You were above tree line, and I just couldn't wait to get to the top of this thing just to see this country. I'd been imagining what it really looked like for a month. And so in my impatience, I'm just wanting to kick our horses and get going. And at times, once in a while we'd get off the horse and we'd walk. But once we got up to the top of that mountain and we look, it's just this sea of endless mountains. By the time we got back late the second evening, it was like pitch dark. I was so saddle sore. Man, I was like maybe the sorest I'd ever been up to that point in my whole entire life. But I learned a lesson. We all think when you're down in the valley, and this translates into everything in life, I believe, and you see this mountain top, from here, you think that this mountain is everything. That's it. That's what there is. That's what you have to go for, is from here. You have no idea what you can't see when you get here. So you think your objective is to get to here, and then that's it. Maybe you turn around and you come back or whatever, or you go this way. But when you get to the top of that mountain, and once you get there, 9 times out of 10, what you don't realize when you're down in the valley is that there is a whole mountain range to be accessed from there. And now once you're to the top here, once you're up this might just be a foothill. That's the other thing to recognize. But once you get to here, now you can access so many of these mountains, and a lot of times all you got to do is just go down one little low saddle, or you'll find a ridge that leads to all sorts of other mountains that you didn't even know existed from down in the valley below. The purpose of a switchback is that by taking a gradual approach, you can reduce and relieve the strain on your body, which will help you stay fresh and help you go further. And maybe, perhaps more importantly, it will allow you to pay attention to see what's in front of you and to learn from it.
Out on top of the world here.
We're here for the adventure.
I'm so excited for you.
So if you imagine your goal or dream is to get up to this mountaintop, your two choices are either charge up the top or take the switchbacks. So if you charge up to the top, probably really your only pro is going to be that you're going to get there faster. Your cons are multiple. You're going to likely blister your heels, because you're going to be going up these steep grades and you're going to have loose ground. You're going to fall down, slam your knees. You're likely to get a chafed butt. You're not going to be able to enjoy the view. Once you get there, you're going to be all sweated up, heated up, and perhaps more importantly, are you going to have anything left in the tank to continue to go on further? Because I think that's what I wish I had known when I first started out. My dream of becoming a hunting guide in Alaska, little did I know when I was 19 that, guide school, that first mountain that I was going to climb, that was just the beginning of the journey. So your advantages of taking the switchbacks, or your cons, let's say, of taking switchbacks, is going to be that it's going to take you a lot longer. But your pros are many. It's going to be a lot easier on your body. You're going to have more time to learn, to absorb, to enjoy. As you're going along, you're going to see everything that mountain has to share, that mountain has to teach. And you might likely find things along the trail that supersede whatever it is that you're imagining is at the top. And you might find a whole nother mountain or avenue or drainage or draw that you couldn't see from the bottom that you may choose to go up in. A big thing is to stay malleable, and as you're doing that, as you're sidewinding and going around different sides of the mountains, you're getting different perspectives of that mountain, rather than just charging straight up where basically you're on a one-way trip. You're like a plow horse with blinders on, where you're just charging to the top. You're not going to learn, you're not going to observe. And the key to going on these switchbacks, it's what I've kind of learned, is I've ran into people along these trails that have helped me immensely, and that has kind of course corrected me. And if you learn everything that your first mountain has to teach, you can bet that you are going to learn lessons that are going to be transferable and that are going to help you throughout your life. I went to guide school with 7 other students, and then part of the course was that they would help set you up and find a job. Every one of us wanted from that school to go to be a guide. That's why we went to guide school. But what is often the case is you start off as an packer or a wrangler or a camp jack, depending on where you go, what you do. The guy that ran the guide school, he set a couple of other kids up with an outfitter where they were, I guess, supposedly going to go guide. But he said they were using 4-wheel drive vehicles. And he said, where I'm sending Billy, said something to the effect of, like, this is totally remote, And I was like, oh yeah, that's great. I was so excited. But he later told me that they most likely wouldn't hire me as a guide. I would have to go there and learn. And that disappointed me at the time, but looking back, that was a huge blessing because I wasn't ready to guide. Neither were those other kids that were going to a private ranch, flat land. I think it was kind of an antelope, mule deer kind of a thing. I wanted to go someplace wild and backcountry. Yes, I wanted to guide, but thankfully that first year, 95% of everything I did, I was a camp jack, a wrangler. So it was my job to cut wood and lead the horses and mules, into the wilderness. But I shadowed the guides and I was able to learn a lot. And one of the first guys that I later would guide for in Alaska, his name was Dennis Harms. In Alaska, at least at the time, I'm not exactly sure what the laws are, but you had to have had bought a hunting license in Alaska for 2 years, and had to have a certain number of days in the field before you could get a guide's license. And so I did that. I worked for 2 different outfitters. I was able to get a guide's license and start guiding my second fall. But Dennis, a lot of his packers and trainees, they would have to pack for like 4, maybe 5 years until they guided, because Dennis would retain his guides for a long time. Dennis was a very smart businessman, a good leader. And so he was able to retain help for a long period of time. So it took a long time to, as a packer, as a newbie, to get kind of in the rotation, so to speak. And when I look back at it, and now I see many of those guides that Dennis hired that went through his rigorous and very comprehensive training program over a lot of years, by the time they were a first year guide, they were more experienced than probably a third of the guides in Alaska. They were so well trained, by the time they were ready to guide, there was nowhere to go but up. And I look back now, and I've seen it happen many times. There's a time where you got to kind of fake it till you make it, and eventually I feel I'll do one of these Blaze Your Trail episodes of what that looks like. But I've seen it happen a lot where guys get a guide's license, they're a licensed guide, but they're not ready. And so they fall flat on their face time and time again because there's just so many variables that can happen, and they simply don't have enough experience. It's kind of like this. You can throw somebody a rope to pull them out of a swamp, but you give somebody who isn't prepared, you give them too much rope and they can hang themselves. And that's what happens oftentimes. And so there's this natural process that just seems to take place as you kind of stay the course, switch back up the mountain and just do it slow and steady. It almost seems like life has a way, the right people come in at the right time, or you learn the right lessons along the way that prepare you for what's ahead. Scripture says, "To him who has, more will be given." And I would say that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make is once you're going to be able to take so many lessons from that first mountain, that second, third, and fourth, and then all of that is going to compound, and it's going to translate into almost anything that you try to do in life. Just like if you're climbing a mountain and you're going straight at it, if whatever goal or objective you're trying to attain, if you just put the blinders on and you just go whole hog into it, you're going to have collateral damage. That's where you're going to fall on your knees, your heels are going to be blistered, your butt's going to be chafed. Yes, you might get there, but by the time you get there, you're so wore out, or you've neglected so many other avenues in your life that everything's going to be a whirlwind where you can't even focus or enjoy the direction that you're going or the thing that you just achieved or attained. And that's certainly true with anything of the flesh. Anything, your motive for why you wanted to get there is going to be revealed. So if it's money or power or something, you can bet that it's going to throw your life into turmoil. And I speak from experience, and I'll share a little bit about that. But if you slow and steady, just go about it and kind of embrace everything that comes and recognize that all things are working toward your good, you're going to get to that mountain. When you get to the top of that mountain, you will be prepared for whatever it is over the top that you can't see. If you push too hard, you're probably going to have to come back and start all over again. I had that exact scenario happen with a client of mine. His name is Mike Schenkel. You'll see him on some of my videos. He went sheep hunting. This has been about 10 years ago. And him and his guide, they hiked 15 miles back into this country, really before there was any sheep. It might even been farther than that. And by the time he got there, his feet were so jacked up and they hurt so bad, they basically just sat there and rested for 2 days, and then they just hiked out and hunted grizzly bear for the rest of the trip because he pushed so hard, he just destroyed himself. And so it took 10 years before he had the confidence enough to try it again. And then that's when I guided him, and thankfully, I was experienced enough as a guide to recognize and have made many of those mistakes myself, that we took a more manageable approach to a sheep hunt. And I actually did the same thing. I did a television show. That's when Modern Day Mountain Man was started. I did a DVD, had a lot of really good feedback, and I'm like, you know what? I see all these other TV shows. Why can't I do that? I could have all these hunts, these Alaskan hunts. It'd be better than anything else that's on TV. And so I just blared through it. I asked some other people some advice, and guys that were in the industry, and they all kind of told me man, it's hard, There was so many things that I didn't know, and after 2 years of it, I fell flat on my face, man, and I was burned out, and I almost altogether quit. But fortunately, I just picked the video camera back up and just started doing what I knew, what I loved, because I actually just almost wanted to throw the video camera away because I hated it. And eventually I just got back on the horse and started all over again. And that's kind of when I started to figure out this switchback approach. So my plan all along was to get to Alaska and become a hunting guide. Kind of a loose idea in my mind was, well, if I could go to Alaska, guide for 5 years, I will have seen about everything. By then, something else will come up. Honestly, I kind of figured at that point I would move back home, get a real job, I guess, and live a normal life. That was about the extent of my plan. But just like I described, once I got to Alaska, and probably more than anything, it was the people that I met. 80% of these people that I met were self-made. And many of them just started off very similar to what I did. They were just like people that I knew, but they did things just a little bit different. They started with something and they brought incredible intention to it. They worked hard. They sacrificed. They didn't look at the now. They just stayed on the trail. And they never quit. They just kept working, slow but sure, toward one goal. Typically, whatever their area of expertise or their business was, they just stuck to it. They reinvested back into their business, and eventually they just built it to the point where they had freedom and latitude to be able to afford to go on these hunting trips and also to be able to take that time off. So when I look back at it, that was those guys the whole time as I'm kind of going on about my life. I had this built-in mentorship from anywhere from 10 to 15 different successful people every single year. And that just molded me into who I am. It shaped and changed my perspective. And it gave me confidence to kind of continue down my path. And so, I tried TV, that didn't work, but the filming thing happened right early on. I enjoyed that, continued making DVDs, And eventually, I kind of just saw some promise in that, in this filming. I wasn't sure what that was going to look like. And eventually, doors opened up for public speaking. So I started doing a little bit of that. Typically, that was all, I wasn't getting paid anything, but I was able to promote my videos. I've always had an interest in writing. I did a little bit of writing, made some submissions, got accepted to some magazines. My first one was Sports Afield. That was maybe it's still a pretty big magazine nowadays, but I got paid $500 for this article, and I'm like, dang, there's something to this. So speaking, video, writing, next thing I kind of realized, like, man, these are all kind of the same thing. They're all storytelling, and eventually I just get a little bit more recognition and things start to grow a little bit. And now all of a sudden I kind of realize that, hey, this is my industry now. But during that time, there's times where the trail might actually go down. You're going to go down, underneath some big rocky ledge or something. I got my registered guide license or my outfitter's license, and I started flying airplanes, and it just, for me, I knew that the outfitter thing, that was the natural, how would you put it? Like the conventional wisdom type of approach. And I knew that just didn't strike me. As my old friend Tommy from Montana once told me, is like, have a vision in your mind, but always be malleable. Just stay the course and observe as you're going along, and recognize that there's always going to be these little micro adjustments. Just like any hunt, you go in there with a plan, but you just got to adjust and adapt as you go. And when you look at a mountain, you never see a game trail going straight up. Game trails, they're always they're going up or down slightly. If a game trail went straight up, the first big rain would wash it out. All the water would run right down it, and it would be a complete washout, leaving no opportunity for anybody else to follow behind you. And what I recognized that over time, what made me a better guide was maybe when my body started to hurt a little bit and I started paying a little bit more attention. I slowed down. When I was young, first guiding, I would try to kill a sheep every day. As I got a little bit more experienced, I kind of recognized I got to kill a sheep in 10 days. And that approach, how you approach that, is exactly what I'm talking about. Why I became a better guide later on is early on, I would run up and down the mountain and I would just go gung-ho to try to kill a sheep. And just like what happened to Mike, I know oftentimes I would wear my hunters out. But thankfully, back when I was first sheep guiding, there was enough sheep in the mountains that you could typically get one. 10 years ago, we have this winter die-off and we lose about 80% of our sheep herd. Now you're really just hoping that in 10 days you can get one crack at a legal ram. And I think that approach, from then on, that's when I started carrying my camp with me. And I wanted to move slow, but always be in sheep country as much as I could. I couldn't afford to be making any mistakes. We seemed to get one stalk every hunt, and you wanted to make sure you got it right. You'd find one legal ram. And so the point of it is I would plan for the worst. Sometimes I might take 10 days worth of food on my back. Typically I'd take about 5, and I'd plan like a 5-day loop, come back and then regroup. But the thing is, I was very slow, very methodical. I paid attention to the details. Like I'd set up a camp. I was very particular of where I'd camp. I'd camp somewhere, obviously, where there was water, but where we could see as much sheep as possible. Everything that I did was calculated, and all those subtle nuances, that's what helped make us successful. And again, it was just all these little micro lessons that I learned along the way that allowed me to continue to be successful in the mountains, even though there wasn't nearly as many sheep as there were. And this whole modern day mountain man brand, it was probably about 7 or 8 years ago where I dang near hung it up to go back to farming. And I'm so glad that I didn't. I just stayed in my industry, stayed in my mountain range where I've always wanted to be. But I basically had to take some chances and I had to take some risks. I had to get out of my comfort zone, quit doing what had been working for me up to that point. I wanted to stay on the mountain where I was comfortable, but I had to go down through a couple other smaller valleys and get onto these new mountains where I needed to be. And that's one of those things where nobody else can tell you that. That's just one of those things that you have to figure out for yourself. But in doing so, in pursuing public speaking, video production, doing more things on YouTube, I'm literally doing those exact same things in my business. I'm navigating waters that I've never been in. I'm in a new wilderness, but I've learned enough principles. And one of the things that I told my guys to start off with is like, hey, no, the last thing we want to do is like dump all of our content on YouTube and blow up our business. It's like, if we blow up our business, that's just going to create problems. I want this simple, sustainable. I want to keep this to where I enjoy it. I don't want this, more exposure. More of anything is just going to lead to more problems. So no, let's just take this slow and steady, and really it's kind of starting to come to fruition now. It took a long time for us to break things in, to learn each other's personalities, strengths and weaknesses, and now I feel like we're at that stage where, okay, it's time to move ahead. It's time to climb, look to see what are some other mountains that we want to try to address professionally. And those lessons that I've learned along the way are absolutely coming true. And honestly, that's why I'm sharing this video. These videos in general, I was just so blessed to have so many mentors who have gone and done similar things that gave me the confidence to pursue up my own mountains and chase my own ambitions and dreams. And so as you continue along and you do things well, you climb your mountain and you achieve some success, eventually, more than likely, you're going to come to some opportunities where you're going to be called to lead people. Just like I was called to lead people hunting, and now I feel through speaking and having a business, couple employees, I'm a father, a husband. At some point or another, we're all called to lead people. And when you're leading a pack string up the mountain, you are definitely going to want to be taking those switchbacks and that trail. And what happens when you take a switchback, when you get to that corner, you've got to slow down. When they come to that switchback, they're going to do like a little stutter step and then slow down, and then all of a sudden they're going to get pulled really fast. And then that creates this yin-yang dynamic. So just like when I was guiding hunters, you have to slow down. And to make sure that everybody can keep up. When it's just you, it's easy to kind of run up and down the mountain. But if you're doing that as a leader, you are going to wear people out. And you're going into the mountain with a pack string. I've done it many times. You pack in 25 miles or whatever. It takes you a long, long day. Just like packing in on those sheep hunts, those packs are heavy and you're moving slow. But then once you get there, once you pack that big camp and you got feed and food and a tent, you got enough to stay for 8 days out into the wilderness. Man, that is a beautiful thing. You can relax. You can take your time. You don't have to push it. You don't have to worry about getting all the way back to camp before dark. You get up there in the middle of nowhere. You wake up in the morning. You could see game wherever you're at. So it's just like anything. If you want something to last for a long time, it's going to take you a lot longer to get it, to build it. And So recognize that if you're leading people, you have to slow down. You have to pay attention to what they need. Those mules are going to drop shoes. Their pack is going to need to be rebalanced. Yes, it takes longer, but when you're there and when you need them, when you shoot that animal way down in that hole, that mule that took you a little bit longer to get into camp is going to save you 2-3 days to pack that bugger out. As I mentioned, every client that I've guided, their stories were so interesting. And I would say I'm a pretty good hunter, I do fine, but I would say I'm a very good guide. And what made me a good guide is I was naturally interested in people. So that came very easy for me. I wanted to know who they were. I loved having conversations. I loved learning from them. I didn't really like to learn from at school. I would say maybe the biggest weakness that I have is I have a tendency not to learn from other people. I have a tendency to think I'm smarter than everybody else and just try things my own way. That's helped me and hurt me in many different ways. But when I can just sit with somebody one-on-one and talk to them, that's where I'm comfortable. That's what I like. That's what makes sense to me. And so for whatever reason, that gave me an opportunity to really learn, and not even purposely, but just to hear their story. And there was so many commonalities, and a big one was prolonged trials of adversity. So many guys that I talked to in their business or in their family with their children or grandchildren, whatever it may have been, you hear these stories over and over and over again of prolonged hardship and perseverance on their part to finally arrive. Or whatever their goal that they were hoping for, that it came to fruition. It was kind of like when I was in New Zealand and we hiked, I don't know, it was about 10 to 15 miles and you're through the brush, and they told me on the front end is like, hey, it's a mental battle just to get there. And you're going in and these mountains are super steep. We hiked like, I don't know, 10, 12 miles on the flat, and then we hiked like 2 miles up, and that was for day one. And then day two, it took us like 6 hours to go 1,000 yards. And then once you get up out of the tree line and in the alpine, it kind of like flattened out. And then it's still steep, but it was relatively easy to get around. And so I've just recognized we just get bogged down. We get frustrated. We just think that, it's not going to happen. And I just learned that perseverance, just stick to it. If there's something that you believe that you just can't let go of, that you would rather fail having tried it than to risk not trying it, the grief of having not tried it would supersede having tried it and failed. And there comes a time in all of our lives, and we have to decide that of, hey, I've pushed too hard, I need to back out, I need to move on, or come out of this mountain range and go back over here. My guide buddy Reno comes to mind. He guided a long time, he loved it. And eventually, he had wife and kids, and as happens to most guides, eventually they realize like, hey, this just isn't worth it anymore. The cost is too high. I need to be doing this now. So that certainly happens, and there is zero shame in that. That happens to all of us in various capacities throughout life, and nobody can make that judgment but us. And so I would say to get out there and explore and find what you're passionate about. Find the mountain range you want to be in, and then climb that first mountain that makes the most sense to you. And know that everything you learn on mountain number 1 is absolutely going to translate to other mountains for the rest of your life. And know that there's very few shortcuts. But use the terrain to your advantage and work with nature rather than against it. And keep that vision of what you want and where you're headed, but always, as Tommy said, always be malleable. And yeah, everybody's going to fall, but get back up and keep going. Stick it out, because every mountain has its top. So embrace the switchbacks and know that this mountain is almost certain not to be your final mountain, but rather the mountain that you're climbing right now, that just might be your base camp for a whole wilderness of mountains ahead. And one of the best things of me going to Alaska and being immersed in the wilderness is I was actually able to focus and pay attention enough to read a book. There was only so many things you can do out in the wilderness when you're snowed in. So you could read darn near any book, like Undaunted Courage comes to mind. There's a book about Shackleton called South, and maybe Endurance, actually. I think there's a couple different books. But he explored the South Pole, Antarctica. There's a lot of them out there, and you read some books like that and you will find these stories of perseverance. In the Bible, in the book of Genesis, you read the story of Joseph, of the coat of many colors, or read in Exodus the book of Moses, and you talk about like switchbacks, a roller coaster of life of different directions, and how all of that stuff, just fit together to prepare them and lead them into their God-given calling, their destiny. That is powerful. And so I think we oftentimes underestimate what we can do in a lifetime, because it's hard to really drive towards that one point 20, 30, 50 years out. But if you just continue along the way and embrace the switchbacks, that's all I can think of, the best way I can think to put it, because the journey is the destination ultimately. And to find a life that you love, that is sustainable, if there is a secret to life, that might be it right there. So with that, I just want to thank you guys for watching. I just want to remind you, as I kind of like to always come to, be honest, keep it simple, and seek the truth. What started with that tiny little video camera, and that's still the camera that I use. One day we were trying to put these films together, and we realized we were trying to make our films like the films that everybody else had made. But I can't do that. I don't have a cameraman. I don't have good cinematography. And then I realized, rather than try to be like everybody else and compete with them, these guys that have cameramen, hundreds of thousands of dollars of budgets, but what I found was a niche. And my niche is this. What do I have that nobody else has? What can I do better than anybody else? And that's this. I've got 25 years in the wilderness. I've been on 40 Dall sheep hunts, 50 brown bear hunts, way too many caribou hunts to count, moose hunts, you name it. I've been on all those. Focus on what we have. And if you have something that nobody else has, and then you can design your business, your brand, your service around that, who's your competition?